The letter arrived on a Thursday morning, sliding through my mailbox like a knife between ribs. It was cream-colored paper, expensive stock, with embossed letterhead that screamed importance. My sister Natasha's engagement party invitation, black tie, Beverly Hills, a celebration of love, success, and everything our family held sacred. At the bottom, in my mother's precise handwriting, a note that made my stomach drop. Darling, perhaps you could take leave and wear something elegant for once. This is a very important night for us. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The dismissal was surgical in its precision. 3 years of active duty in the Navy, countless sleepless nights protecting classified networks from foreign threats, and to them, I was still just someone who needed to dress up and play pretend at being successful. I stared at that note until the words blurred, feeling the familiar ache of being perpetually misunderstood by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. The Ashworth family had always been a study in contrasts, though you'd never know it from the glossy holiday cards we sent out each year. To the outside world, we were the picture of American success. My father, Charles Ashworth, had built a small empire in commercial real estate, turning empty lots into gleaming shopping centers across Southern California. My mother, Victoria, had parlayed her psychology degree into a thriving private practice, treating the anxieties of wealthy suburban wives. They lived in a world where success was measured in square footage and stock portfolios, where achievement came with a press release and a trophy case. And then there was Natasha, their crown jewel, their vindication of superior parenting. She had emerged from the womb with an innate understanding of how to play the game. Even as a child, she knew exactly which activities would generate the most parental approval, which accomplishments would earn the longest applause at dinner parties. By high school, she was student body president, homecoming queen, and valedictorian, not because she was passionate about any of it, but because she understood that these titles would open doors and impress the right people. College was simply an extension of her strategic brilliance. She chose Stanford not for its academic rigor, but for its networking potential. She studied international business not because she loved it, but because it sounded impressive at cocktail parties. She dated the son of a venture capitalist, not because of love, but because he looked good in family photos and had the right connections. Everything Natasha did was calculated, purposeful, designed to build a life that would make our parents burst with pride. I was the anomaly, the glitch in their perfect system. From an early age, I showed signs of what they considered concerning independence. While Natasha was performing in dance recitals and beauty pageants, I was in the backyard teaching myself to code on an ancient laptop I'd bought with money from babysitting. While she was perfecting her smile for photographs, I was fascinated by the invisible digital wars being fought in cyberspace, reading about hackers and security breaches with the intensity other kids reserved for fairy tales. My parents watched my interests with the same bewildered concern they might show for a child who insisted on speaking a foreign language at the dinner table. They didn't understand my world, couldn't see the beauty in elegant code or the thrill of outsmarting a sophisticated cyber attack. To them, computers were tools for checking email and shopping online, not the complex battleground I knew them to be. The first real crack in our family foundation appeared during my junior year of high school. Natasha had just been accepted to Stanford with a partial scholarship, and the house buzzed with celebration for weeks. Champagne flowed, phone calls were made to relatives, and my mother posted constant updates on her brilliant daughter's achievement. The acceptance letter was framed and hung in the living room like a diploma, a daily reminder of Natasha's superiority. That same week, I had been quietly working on something that seemed far more significant to me. I had discovered a vulnerability in our school district's network that could have allowed malicious actors to access student records, grades, and personal information. Instead of exploiting it, I had spent months developing a comprehensive security patch and presenting my findings to the IT department. They were so impressed that they not only implemented my solution, but recommended me for a prestigious cybersecurity summer program at the Naval Academy. When I showed my parents the acceptance letter to the program, their reaction was as predictable as it was devastating. My father glanced at it briefly before setting it aside, his attention already drifting back to his phone. "That's nice, sweetheart," he said absently. Will this interfere with your college applications? My mother barely looked up from planning Natasha's graduation party. Computers are fine as a hobby, dear, but you need to think about your future. Maybe consider something more stable, like teaching or nursing. The dismissal was so casual, so complete, that it took my breath away. They couldn't see past their narrow definition of success to recognize that I had just been invited to train with some of the brightest young minds in cybersecurity. To them, it was just another computer thing, as forgettable as a video game tournament or a coding club meeting. That summer at the Naval Academy changed everything for me. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who understood my language, who saw the same threats and opportunities I did in the digital landscape. The instructors were brilliant, the challenges were intense, and I felt like I had finally found my tribe. When they offered me a direct commission path after college, I knew I had found my calling. Breaking the news to my parents was like detonating a bomb in our pristine living room. I had prepared for weeks, researching statistics about military careers, printing out information about the Navy's cybersecurity programs, even preparing a PowerPoint presentation about the importance of digital defense in modern warfare. I thought if I could just make them understand the significance of what I was choosing, they might finally see me the way the instructors at the academy had. The conversation took place on a Sunday evening. The whole family gathered around our massive dining room table after one of my mother's elaborate home-cooked meals. Natasha was there with her boyfriend Marcus, the venture capitalist's son, and they were regaling everyone with stories about their internships at prestigious firms. The table was warm with laughter and wine, everyone relaxed and happy. It seemed like the perfect moment to share my news. I have an announcement to make, I said, standing up and smoothing my hands nervously on my jeans. I've been accepted into the Navy's officer candidate program with a specialty in cybersecurity. After graduation, I'll be commissioned as an ensign and stationed at Norfolk Naval Base. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. My father's wine glass stopped halfway to his lips. My mother's smile froze in place like a mask that had suddenly become too heavy to wear. Natasha and Marcus exchanged a glance that was equal parts confusion and pity. The military? My father finally managed, his voice carrying the same tone he might use to say, the circus or the sanitation department. Elena, sweetheart, you don't understand what you're saying. The military is for people who don't have other options. You're smart. You have a future ahead of you. Why would you throw it all away? My mother reached across the table and grabbed my hand with the desperate grip of someone trying to pull me back from a cliff. Honey, this is just a phase. You're young, you're idealistic, but you need to think practically. What about graduate school? What about a real career? What about marriage and children? You can't build a life around playing soldier. The phrase playing soldier hit me like a physical blow. I tried to explain the complexity of modern cyber warfare, the critical importance of protecting our nation's digital infrastructure, the incredible responsibility that would be placed on my shoulders. But their eyes had already glazed over with that familiar mixture of pity and disappointment. They weren't hearing the words I was saying. They were already mourning the daughter they thought they were losing. Natasha, ever the diplomat, tried to find middle ground. Maybe Elena could use this military thing as a stepping stone, she suggested, her voice dripping with condescension. Like, do a few years, get some discipline and structure, then transition into corporate security or something more normal. She said the word normal like it was a life preserver she was throwing to a drowning person. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat in my childhood bedroom staring at my acceptance letter and wondering if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. The doubt crept in like fog, seeping through every crack in my confidence. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was being naive and impulsive. Maybe I should listen to the people who loved me and wanted what was best for me. But then I remembered the feeling I'd had at the Naval Academy, the sense of purpose and belonging that had filled me completely for the first time in my life. I thought about the instructors who had seen potential in me, who had treated my skills and insights with respect and excitement. I realized that my parents' love for me was real, but it was conditional on me becoming someone I wasn't. They loved the idea of who they wanted me to be, not who I actually was. The next morning, I confirmed my acceptance into the program. When I told my parents, they reacted as if I had announced I was joining a cult. My mother cried, my father retreated into cold, professional politeness, the way he might treat a client who had made an unwise investment decision. They didn't disown me, but they clearly considered my choice a temporary madness that would eventually burn itself out. The contrast in their reactions became even starker over the next few years. Natasha graduated summa cum laude from Stanford and immediately landed a position at a prestigious consulting firm in Manhattan. The celebration was epic, weeks of dinner parties and phone calls and social media posts documenting every moment of her triumph. My parents rented out a private dining room at their country club, invited everyone they knew, and gave speeches about how proud they were of their successful daughter. When I graduated from officer candidate school and received my commission as an ensign, they attended the ceremony with the same enthusiasm they might show for a dental appointment. They sat in the back row, arrived late, and left early. My mother took exactly 3 photos, none of which ever made it to social media. There was no celebration dinner, no phone calls to relatives, no speeches about pride and accomplishment. Just a quick congratulations and a suggestion that maybe now I could get this military thing out of my system. The divide only deepened as our careers progressed. Natasha's life was a constant stream of visible achievements and social media-worthy moments. Promotions at work, luxury vacations, engagement to Marcus, a wedding that was featured in a glossy magazine. Every milestone was documented, celebrated, and used as evidence of superior life choices. My parents basked in the reflected glory, their social status elevated by their daughter's obvious success. Meanwhile, I was building a career that was largely invisible to the outside world. The nature of cybersecurity work meant that most of my greatest achievements were classified. My biggest victories were preventing disasters that never happened, and my most important contributions were protecting systems that civilians never knew existed. I couldn't post on social media about the foreign cyber attacks I'd helped thwart or the critical infrastructure I'd secured. I couldn't even tell my parents the details of what I did all day, which only reinforced their belief that my job was unimportant and mysterious. The frustration was constant and grinding. While Natasha was getting write-ups in business magazines and speaking at industry conferences, I was working 18-hour days in secure facilities that didn't officially exist. While she was networking at charity galas and building her personal brand, I was part of a team that was literally defending the nation from digital warfare. But because my work couldn't be publicized or celebrated, it might as well not have existed in my family's universe. The phone calls home became exercises in polite fiction. My parents would spend 20 minutes detailing Natasha's latest achievements, then ask me perfunctory questions about my little Navy job with the same tone they might use to ask about the weather. When I tried to share what I could about my work, their attention would wander almost immediately. The conversation would inevitably drift back to Natasha's latest promotion, or Marcus's new business venture, or their plans for an elaborate anniversary party. I started calling home less frequently, partly because of my demanding schedule, but mostly because each conversation left me feeling diminished and invisible. The emotional distance grew wider with each passing month, until family gatherings felt like performances where I was playing the role of the disappointing daughter who had chosen a mysterious and unimpressive career path. The most painful incident happened during a family Christmas dinner about 2 years into my service. Natasha had just been promoted to senior consultant and was regaling the table with stories about her high-profile clients and international travel. My Uncle Robert, my father's brother, was hanging on every word, occasionally glancing in my direction with barely concealed pity. "And what about you, Elena?" he finally asked during a lull in Natasha's monologue. "How's your Navy thing going? Still playing with computers?" I took a deep breath and tried to explain, in the most general terms possible, that I was part of a team responsible for protecting critical military networks from sophisticated foreign attacks. I mentioned that I had recently been selected for an advanced training program that only accepted the top 5% of cybersecurity officers. I tried to convey the importance and complexity of the work without revealing any classified information. Uncle Robert nodded politely, but I could see his eyes glazing over with the same familiar mixture of confusion and dismissal I'd grown to expect from my family. That sounds complicated, he said with a weak smile. But tell me, when are you going to settle down, meet a nice man, maybe think about starting a family? You can't spend your whole life playing around with computers. The word playing hit me like a slap. Here I was, literally defending the nation from cyber warfare, working with some of the brightest minds in the field, and he saw it as playing. The casual dismissal of years of intensive training, countless hours of classified work, and genuine expertise was breathtaking in its completeness. But what hurt even more was the silence from my parents. They didn't correct him, didn't defend my choices, didn't even attempt to explain that my work might be more significant than it appeared. They just sat there, nodding along, as if his assessment was perfectly reasonable. In that moment, I understood that they would never see me the way they saw Natasha. I would always be the child who had made the inexplicable choice to waste her potential on something they couldn't understand or celebrate. That Christmas was the last time I tried to explain my work to anyone in my family. From then on, I kept our conversations strictly superficial, discussing the weather, their health, and safe topics that wouldn't lead to dismissive comments about my career choices. The emotional wall I built was necessary for my sanity, but it also meant that the gap between us grew wider and more unbridgeable with each passing year. As I advanced through the ranks and took on increasingly complex and critical assignments, the irony of the situation became almost absurd. I was briefing senior Pentagon officials, working directly with intelligence agencies, and helping to shape national cybersecurity policy. But to my family, I was still just Elena, who had chosen an odd career path but nobody really understood. The disconnect between my actual responsibilities and their perception of my work became so vast that I sometimes felt like I was living a double life. The breaking point came with that engagement party invitation, and my mother's note about wearing something elegant for once. The casual dismissal of my uniform, the symbol of everything I had worked for and sacrificed to earn, was the final straw. As I held that cream-colored invitation in my hands, I realized that I was tired of being invisible to the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I was tired of having my achievements minimized and my choices questioned. I was tired of being the family disappointment simply because my success couldn't be measured in dollars or documented in social media posts. For the first time in years, I felt something shift inside me. The desperate need for their approval, the aching hunger for recognition that had driven me through childhood and adolescence, simply evaporated. It wasn't replaced by anger or bitterness, but by something far more powerful: indifference. I no longer cared what they thought of my choices because I finally understood that their opinions were based on ignorance and prejudice, not love or wisdom. I looked at that invitation one more time, noting the expensive paper and elegant typography, all the superficial markers of importance that my family valued so highly. Then I picked up my phone and started making the calls that would change everything. If they wanted to see success they could understand and celebrate, I would give them exactly that. But it would be on my terms, not theirs. The plan that formed in my mind over the next few days wasn't born of malice or revenge. It was simpler and more profound than that. I was tired of being misunderstood, tired of having my life's work dismissed as insignificant. If my family couldn't see the value in what I was doing, maybe it was time to show them in a language they would finally understand. The invitation to Natasha's engagement party was about to become something much more interesting than a simple family celebration. It was going to become the night when their carefully constructed worldview collided with the truth they had been too blind to see. The secure email notification appeared on my screen at exactly 13:47 hours on a Tuesday afternoon, pulling me away from a complex analysis of suspicious network traffic patterns. The sender was Admiral Rebecca Chen, Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Information Warfare, and the subject line made my pulse quicken: Eyes Only, Special Recognition Event. I went through the standard decryption protocols, my fingers moving automatically across the keyboard while my mind raced with possibilities. What I found inside that encrypted message changed everything I thought I knew about my sister's engagement party. The document was an official invitation to a presidential reception honoring military personnel and civilian contractors who had contributed to Operation Digital Shield, a classified cyber defense initiative that had recently been declassified for public recognition. The event was scheduled for the same evening as Natasha's party, at the same hotel in Beverly Hills where my family would be celebrating her engagement to Marcus. But this wasn't just a recognition ceremony. According to the invitation, President Harrison himself would be presenting the Presidential Unit Citation to the team that had prevented what intelligence agencies were calling the most sophisticated cyber attack in American history. The operation name sent a chill down my spine. Neptune's Gate. I had been the lead analyst on Neptune's Gate, the officer who had first identified the threat and coordinated the response that had saved millions of Americans from a catastrophic infrastructure collapse. For 18 months, I had lived and breathed that operation. The attack had been planned by a consortium of foreign state actors working in coordination with criminal hackers, designed to simultaneously cripple the electrical grid, water treatment facilities, and telecommunications networks across the Pacific coast. The sophistication was unprecedented, the potential damage unimaginable. If successful, it would have sent California into chaos, disrupting everything from hospitals to banking systems to traffic control networks. I remembered those final 48 hours with crystal clarity. My team had been working around the clock in a secure facility buried 3 levels beneath the Pentagon, surviving on energy drinks and determination while we raced against an invisible enemy. The attackers had used a combination of advanced persistent threats, zero-day exploits, and social engineering that was breathtaking in its complexity. They had spent years infiltrating systems, planting logic bombs, and mapping critical infrastructure with the patience of master strategists. The breakthrough had come at 03:47 hours on a Thursday morning, when I noticed an anomaly in the communication patterns between infected systems. It was subtle, almost invisible among the massive amounts of data we were analyzing, but something about the timing intervals struck me as artificially precise. I spent the next 6 hours following that thread, mapping connections, building a picture of the attack's true scope. What I discovered was terrifying. The entire assault was designed to cascade, with each system failure triggering additional attacks in a carefully orchestrated symphony of destruction. But understanding the pattern also revealed its weakness. The attacker's sophistication had become their vulnerability.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Their coordination required constant communication between command and control servers, and that communication followed predictable patterns once you knew what to look for. I designed a counterattack that would turn their own coordination system against them, essentially using their command structure to deliver our defensive payloads to every infected system simultaneously. The operation to deploy our countermeasures was the most intense 36 hours of my career. We had one chance to get it right, one opportunity to deliver our digital vaccine before the attackers realized what we were doing and triggered their assault early. I coordinated teams across multiple time zones, managed real-time intelligence feeds from 3 different agencies, and made split-second decisions that affected the safety of millions of people who would never know how close they had come to disaster. When it was over, when the last infected system had been cleansed and the threat neutralized, the silence in our operations center was profound. We had prevented a catastrophe that would have made 9/11 look like a minor inconvenience, and almost no one would ever know it had happened. The successful defense of critical infrastructure rarely makes headlines because the best victories are the disasters that never occur. But apparently, someone very important had been paying attention. The invitation in my hands was signed by Admiral Chen herself, and it included a personal note that made my breath catch. Lieutenant Commander Ashworth, your leadership during Neptune's Gate exemplified the finest traditions of naval service. The President specifically requested your presence at the ceremony. I had been promoted to lieutenant commander 6 months ago, but seeing my rank and name in the context of presidential recognition felt surreal. I read the invitation 3 times, each pass revealing new details that made the situation more incredible. The ceremony wasn't just recognizing the Neptune's Gate team, it was establishing a new Presidential Cyber Defense Medal, and according to the documentation, I was slated to be the first recipient. The citation described my actions in terms that seemed almost mythological: extraordinary heroism in cyberspace, decisive leadership under extreme pressure, actions that prevented catastrophic loss of life and national infrastructure. The timing couldn't have been more perfect or more ironic. While my family celebrated Natasha's engagement to a venture capitalist's son, I would be receiving the nation's highest honor for cyber warfare from the President of the United States. The juxtaposition was so absurd it almost seemed scripted by a particularly vindictive screenwriter. My parents, who had spent years dismissing my career as unimportant computer work, would be in the same building where their other daughter was being honored by the most powerful person in the world. But the most delicious irony was yet to come. As I continued reading through the classified briefing materials, I discovered something that made my hands tremble with suppressed emotion. The attack that I had helped prevent, the operation that had consumed 18 months of my life and nearly broken my team's collective sanity, had targeted specific infrastructure nodes that would have directly impacted the very hotel where Natasha's party was being held. If Neptune's Gate had succeeded, her engagement celebration would have been canceled due to citywide power outages and communication failures. The attackers hadn't just threatened abstract infrastructure, they had threatened my family's world specifically. The financial district where my father's company was headquartered, the upscale neighborhoods where my parents' friends lived, the network of systems that enabled their comfortable lifestyle, all of it had been in the crosshairs. I had literally saved my family's way of life, and they had no idea it had ever been in danger. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the classified documents spread across my desk, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. The years of seeking their approval, of desperately trying to make them understand the importance of my work, suddenly seemed pathetic and unnecessary. I didn't need their validation because I had something far more valuable: the respect of my peers, the gratitude of my nation, and the knowledge that my work had prevented genuine catastrophe. The plan that began forming in my mind wasn't motivated by revenge or malice. It was simpler and more profound than that. For the first time in my adult life, I was going to choose myself over their comfort. I was going to attend the presidential ceremony, accept the recognition I had earned, and let them discover the truth about their disappointing daughter in the most public way possible. The next morning, I called my mother to confirm my attendance at Natasha's engagement party. My voice was steady, controlled, carrying none of the pleading undertones she was accustomed to hearing from me. "I'll be there," I said simply. "I'll be in my dress blues, as military protocol requires for formal events." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds before she found her voice. "Elena, sweetheart, we've talked about this. It's not appropriate for a family celebration. Can't you just wear a nice dress, something elegant and feminine? This is about Natasha, not about your military thing." "My military thing," I repeated, tasting the dismissiveness of the phrase. "Mother, I'm a lieutenant commander in the United States Navy. When I attend formal events, I wear my uniform. It's not a costume or a political statement, it's my professional attire." "But people will stare," she protested. "It will draw attention away from Natasha. This is her special night, and you know how important this party is for her career and social connections. Please, just this once, can't you try to fit in?" I closed my eyes, hearing decades of similar requests echoing in her words. "Just this once, can't you be normal? Just this once, can't you choose something safe and conventional? Just this once, can't you stop being who you are and become who we want you to be?" "I'll see you Saturday evening," I said, and ended the call before she could launch into another round of negotiations. The days leading up to the party passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. I had my dress blues professionally cleaned and pressed, ensuring every detail was perfect. The uniform represented years of training, sacrifice, and achievement, and it would serve as my armor for the evening ahead. I also received additional briefing materials about the ceremony, including a detailed timeline that showed exactly when the president would be speaking and when the medals would be presented. The logistics were almost too perfect to believe. The presidential reception was being held in the hotel's main ballroom, while Natasha's engagement party was in a smaller, adjoining space. The events were scheduled to overlap by exactly 1 hour, during which time my family would be toasting their daughter's conventional success, while I received recognition that would redefine their understanding of achievement forever. I spent hours that week thinking about the choices that had led me to this moment. Every dismissed conversation, every condescending comment, every time they had minimized my career or questioned my decisions. I thought about the Christmas dinner when Uncle Robert had asked when I was going to stop playing with computers and start living in the real world. I thought about the graduation party they had thrown for Natasha and the polite congratulations they had offered when I received my commission. I thought about years of being invisible in a family that only recognized success when it came with press releases and social media posts. But I also thought about the work itself, the genuine satisfaction I felt when solving complex problems and protecting systems that millions of people depended on without ever knowing it. I thought about my team, brilliant men and women who shared my passion for the invisible war being fought in cyberspace every day. I thought about the threats we had neutralized, the disasters we had prevented, the quiet victories that would never make headlines but had genuine meaning and importance. By the time Saturday evening arrived, I felt a sense of calm certainty that had been missing from my life for years. I wasn't attending this party to prove anything to my family or to seek their belated approval. I was going because it was time for them to see who I really was, not who they wanted me to be. The truth had its own power, and tonight that power would be impossible to ignore. I arrived at the Beverly Hills Hotel 30 minutes before Natasha's party was scheduled to begin, giving myself time to navigate the complex security arrangements for the presidential event. The lobby was already bustling with activity, Secret Service agents conducting final sweeps, while hotel staff prepared for an evening that would host both a family celebration and a national security ceremony. My dress blues drew immediate attention as I walked through the marble-floored lobby. The uniform was a deep navy blue, almost black, with gold buttons and insignia that caught the light from the crystal chandeliers overhead. My ribbons and medals were arranged in perfect rows above my left breast pocket, each one representing a specific achievement or deployment. The gold lieutenant commander stripes on my sleeves were crisp and bright, impossible to mistake for anything other than what they were, symbols of rank, authority, and proven competence. I could see other military personnel moving through the lobby, officers from all branches of service who had been invited to witness or participate in the ceremony. The sight of so many uniforms in one place created an atmosphere of gravitas that was impossible to ignore. These weren't people playing dress-up or making fashion statements. They were professionals who had earned the right to wear these symbols through years of training, sacrifice, and service. The engagement party was already in full swing when I entered the designated room. The space was elegant but intimate, decorated with white flowers and soft lighting that created the perfect backdrop for photographs. About 60 guests mingled around cocktail tables, their conversations creating a warm buzz of social energy. I recognized most of the faces from previous family gatherings, my parents' friends from the country club, business associates, family members I hadn't seen in months. The reaction to my entrance was immediate and uncomfortable. Conversations paused mid-sentence as people turned to stare at the woman in military dress who had just walked into their sophisticated civilian gathering. I could see the confusion in their eyes, the silent questions about why someone was wearing a uniform to an engagement party. Some looked curious, others seemed annoyed by the breach of social protocol, but all of them were definitely looking. My parents spotted me almost immediately, and I watched my mother's face cycle through a range of emotions in the span of seconds: surprise, disappointment, embarrassment, and finally a kind of resigned frustration. She approached me with the fixed smile she usually reserved for dealing with difficult clients, her voice carefully modulated to avoid creating a scene. "Elena, you look very official," she said, the words chosen with surgical precision to avoid sounding either approving or disapproving. "I was hoping you might reconsider the uniform choice, but I suppose it's too late now." My father joined us, his expression carefully neutral, but his discomfort obvious in the way he avoided making direct eye contact. "Well, you certainly stand out," he said, with forced lightness. I hope you're prepared for questions. Most people here aren't familiar with military customs. Before I could respond, Natasha appeared at my side, radiant in a designer dress that probably cost more than most people made in a month. Her smile was genuine, and for a moment I remembered why I had loved her so much when we were children, before family dynamics and competition had complicated our relationship. "Elena, you made it," she said, embracing me carefully to avoid disturbing her perfectly styled hair. "You look so impressive, very official and important." Her tone was warm, but carried an undertone of confusion, as if she couldn't quite understand why someone would choose to wear a uniform to a party, but was trying to be supportive anyway. "Congratulations," I said sincerely. "You look beautiful, and this party is lovely. Mother and father have outdone themselves." The compliment was genuine. Despite everything, I was happy that Natasha had found someone who made her happy, even if I couldn't understand her choices any more than she understood mine. Marcus appeared then, looking every inch the successful young businessman in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. He shook my hand with the firm grip of someone who had been taught that handshakes were important indicators of character, his smile professionally warm but lacking any real warmth. "So, you're the sister we've heard so much about," he said, with the kind of casual friendliness that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Natasha tells me you're in the Navy. That must be interesting work." The pause before interesting spoke volumes about his actual opinion of military careers. "It has its moments," I replied neutrally, not bothering to elaborate. I had learned years ago that trying to explain my work to people like Marcus was an exercise in futility. They heard military and immediately filed it under things that don't really matter in their mental database. The next hour passed in a blur of polite conversations and barely concealed curiosity about my presence in uniform. I answered questions about military life with diplomatic non-answers, deflected inquiries about why I had chosen such an unusual career path, and endured more condescending comments about serving our country than I could count. The phrase was always delivered with the kind of patronizing tone usually reserved for children who had announced their intention to become firefighters or astronauts. But throughout it all, I kept checking my watch, counting down the minutes until the presidential ceremony would begin in the adjacent ballroom. I knew that Admiral Chen and her staff were conducting final briefings, that the president's security detail was completing their preparations, and that in less than 30 minutes, my entire family's understanding of success and achievement would be turned upside down. At exactly 8:15 p.m., I excused myself from a conversation about Marcus's latest business venture and stepped out into the hallway. The contrast between the two events was immediately apparent. While Natasha's party buzzed with the comfortable energy of social networking and celebration, the presidential ceremony carried an atmosphere of formal dignity and national importance. Military personnel and high-ranking civilians moved through the halls with purposeful efficiency, their conversations conducted in the subdued tones appropriate for a significant state occasion. I made my way to the staging area where the other honorees were gathering for final instructions. Admiral Chen was there, resplendent in her dress whites, reviewing the ceremony timeline with her aide. When she saw me, her face broke into a rare smile that spoke of genuine respect and professional admiration. "Lieutenant Commander Ashworth," she said, extending her hand, "I'm glad you could be here. The President is very much looking forward to meeting you. Your work on Neptune's Gate has been briefed to the highest levels of government, and the consensus is clear. You prevented what could have been the most devastating cyber attack in our nation's history." The words should have filled me with pride and satisfaction, but instead I felt a strange sense of calm detachment. After years of seeking recognition from people who couldn't understand my world, I was finally receiving acknowledgement from those who truly comprehended the significance of what I had accomplished. It felt less like validation and more like a simple statement of fact. We reviewed the ceremony procedures one final time. The president would speak for approximately 10 minutes about the importance of cybersecurity and the evolving nature of national defense. Then he would present the presidential unit citation to the Neptune's Gate team as a group, followed by individual recognition for key personnel. I would be called forward last to receive the new Presidential Cyber Defense Medal and a personal commendation for exceptional service. The timing was perfect. The individual presentations were scheduled to begin at exactly 8:45 p.m., which meant I would be walking across that stage to shake hands with the President of the United States at the precise moment my family was toasting Natasha's engagement in the next room. The symbolism was almost too perfect to be accidental. As we prepared to enter the main ballroom, I caught a glimpse of myself in one of the mirrors that lined the hallway. The woman looking back at me was someone I almost didn't recognize. Gone was the uncertain young person who had desperately sought her family's approval. In her place stood a confident military officer who had earned her place through competence, dedication, and genuine achievement. The uniform wasn't a costume or a statement, it was simply the professional attire of someone who had found her calling and excelled at it. The ballroom doors opened, and we filed in to take our designated seats. The room was filled with several hundred guests, including senators, defense contractors, military leaders, and members of the intelligence community. These were people who understood the invisible wars being fought every day in cyberspace, who recognized the critical importance of protecting the digital infrastructure that modern society depended upon. In this room, my work wasn't mysterious or unimportant, it was essential and respected. As I took my seat in the front row, I couldn't help but think about the contrast with the engagement party happening just 50 yards away. In that room, success was measured by stock options and social connections, by visible achievements that could be photographed and shared on social media. In this room, success was measured by threats neutralized and disasters prevented, by quiet victories that would never make headlines but had genuine consequences for national security. The president entered to the sound of "Hail to the Chief," and the entire audience rose in respectful silence. As he took the podium and began to speak about the evolving nature of warfare and the critical importance of cyber defense, I felt a profound sense of belonging that had been missing from my life for years. This was my world, these were my people, and in just a few minutes, they would witness the recognition of work that had genuine meaning and importance. The moment of truth was approaching, and I was ready for it. President Harrison's voice carried the weight of authority as he began describing the threats that most Americans never knew existed. His words painted a picture of digital warfare that was both invisible and omnipresent, of foreign adversaries probing weaknesses in systems that controlled everything from power grids to water supplies. The audience listened with rapt attention as he explained how a small group of military and civilian experts had prevented what intelligence agencies now classified as the most dangerous cyber attack in American history. The operation I'm about to describe, the president continued, his tone growing more serious, remained classified until last month because of its sensitive nature and ongoing security implications. What I can now reveal is that 18 months ago, our nation faced a coordinated assault on our critical infrastructure that would have crippled the Pacific coast and caused casualties in the hundreds of thousands. I felt my heart rate increase as he spoke, knowing that he was describing my mission, my team's work, my 18 months of sleepless nights and impossible decisions. Around me, the audience of military leaders and defense officials listened with the gravity that such threats deserved. These were people who understood that modern warfare wasn't always fought with bullets and bombs, that the most devastating attacks could be launched from thousands of miles away by enemies who never showed their faces. The president gestured toward our section, and I felt the weight of hundreds of eyes settling on our small group. The men and women who prevented this catastrophe worked in complete secrecy, under enormous pressure, with the knowledge that failure would have meant chaos for millions of American citizens. They are the unsung heroes of a new kind of warfare, and tonight we finally have the opportunity to recognize their extraordinary service. He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to settle over the audience, then continued with a detailed description that made my palms sweat with recognition. Every detail he shared was from my briefings, my analysis, my recommendations. He spoke about the sophisticated coordination of the attack, the months of patient infiltration by foreign actors, and the hair-thin margin by which catastrophe had been averted. As he talked, I could see several people in the audience taking notes, understanding that they were hearing the declassified version of an operation that would be studied in military academies for decades to come. The individual who led this defense, President Harrison said, his voice carrying a note of personal admiration, demonstrated the kind of innovative thinking and decisive leadership that exemplifies the finest traditions of American military service. Working with minimal sleep and maximum pressure, this officer identified attack patterns that had escaped detection by multiple agencies, developed countermeasures that turned the enemy's own coordination against them, and personally oversaw the deployment of defensive systems that saved countless lives. I could feel Admiral Chen's eyes on me, along with those of the other senior officers in my row. They knew what was coming, had been briefed on the ceremony's agenda, but the weight of the moment was affecting all of us. This wasn't just military pageantry or political theater. It was the recognition of genuine achievement that had genuine catastrophe. The president's next words sent a jolt through my system that was part pride, part terror, and part disbelief. Lieutenant Commander Elena Ashworth of the United States Navy, please come forward. The sound of my name echoing through that ballroom was surreal, like hearing someone else's voice speaking my identity. I stood on legs that felt simultaneously weak and strong, aware that hundreds of people were watching my every movement, but focused entirely on the figure waiting for me at the podium. The walk to the stage felt both endless and instantaneous, each step carrying me further from the person I had been and closer to someone I was still discovering. As I approached the president, I could see the genuine respect in his eyes, the kind of recognition that can't be faked or manufactured for political purposes. This was one professional acknowledging another, one person who understood the weight of impossible decisions, recognizing someone else who had carried that weight successfully. Lieutenant Commander Ashworth, he said, extending his hand, on behalf of a grateful nation, thank you for your service and your sacrifice. What you and your team accomplished will never be fully understood by the American people, but it will never be forgotten by those of us who know the truth. The handshake was firm, presidential, carrying the weight of genuine gratitude. As flashbulbs fired and cameras captured the moment, I felt a profound sense of completion that had nothing to do with my family's approval or disapproval. This was recognition from people who understood the stakes, who comprehended the complexity of what my team had achieved, who knew that our success had prevented genuine catastrophe. The president turned to address the audience, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom sound system. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the first recipient of the Presidential Cyber Defense Medal, awarded for extraordinary heroism in the digital domain and decisive action that prevented catastrophic loss of American lives and infrastructure. The applause that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't the polite acknowledgement you might hear at a corporate awards dinner or the enthusiastic but shallow cheering of a sporting event. This was the sound of professional respect, of peers acknowledging exceptional achievement, of people who understood exactly what such recognition meant. The ovation went on for nearly 2 minutes, wave after wave of genuine appreciation from an audience that included some of the most accomplished military and civilian leaders in the nation. As the applause finally died down, the president leaned in close enough that only I could hear his next words. Commander, I've been briefed on the full scope of Operation Neptune's Gate, including details that will remain classified for years to come. What you accomplished was nothing short of remarkable. You should be very proud. The ceremony continued with recognition for other members of the cyber defense community, but I was barely aware of the proceedings. I sat in my chair on the stage, the presidential medal heavy in my hands, trying to process the magnitude of what had just occurred. 18 months of classified work had just been publicly acknowledged by the most powerful person in the world. Years of family dismissal and condescension had just been definitively answered by presidential recognition. But even as I savored the moment, I was acutely aware of what was happening 50 yards away in the adjacent room. My family was celebrating Natasha's engagement, toasting her conventional success, completely unaware that their disappointing daughter was receiving the highest honor the nation could bestow for cyber warfare. The irony was almost overwhelming in its completeness. The ceremony concluded with the traditional playing of the national anthem, and as the last notes faded away, the audience began to disperse into smaller groups for the reception that would follow. I found myself surrounded by senior officers and defense officials who wanted to discuss the operation, to ask technical questions about our methodology, to understand how we had detected and countered such a sophisticated threat. Admiral Chen appeared at my side, her expression mixing professional pride with personal satisfaction. Outstanding work tonight, Commander, she said quietly. You represented the Navy and your profession with distinction. I hope you understand the significance of what just occurred. I nodded, still processing the evening's events. It's still sinking in, Admiral. 2 hours ago, I was making small talk at my sister's engagement party. Now I'm holding a medal from the President of the United States. Speaking of your sister's party, Admiral Chen said with a slight smile, I believe some of your family members have been trying to gain access to this reception. Security informed me that several civilians have been asking questions about a Lieutenant Commander Ashworth and whether she's related to the Elena Ashworth they know. The words sent a chill down my spine that was part anticipation, part dread. Of course they had heard. The presidential ceremony wasn't exactly a secret event, and my name being announced by the President of the United States wasn't something that would escape notice for long. Hotel staff talked, security personnel compared notes, and news of the evening's events would spread quickly through the building. What did security tell them? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. They confirmed that you are indeed a naval officer who received recognition tonight, but they didn't provide any details about the nature of the ceremony or your specific role. That information will become public through normal channels tomorrow, but for now, your family only knows that you were honored by the president for something related to your military service. I could picture the scene perfectly, my parents receiving incomplete information, trying to piece together what had happened, slowly realizing that their understanding of my career had been fundamentally wrong. The confusion, the embarrassment, the dawning awareness that they had been dismissing work of genuine national importance. They're requesting permission to attend a reception, Admiral Chen continued. The decision is entirely yours, Commander. This is your night, and you have every right to enjoy it without family complications. I considered the options carefully. I could continue to avoid them, could enjoy the recognition and respect of my professional peers without having to deal with their questions and confusion. It would be easier, cleaner, free from the emotional complications that family dynamics inevitably brought. But it would also mean missing the opportunity to finally bridge the gap between their world and mine, to help them understand what I had been trying to tell them for years. Let them come, I said finally. It's time they met the real me. Admiral Chen nodded approvingly. I'll have security escort them over. But Commander, remember that this evening belongs to you and your achievements. Don't let anyone diminish what you've accomplished here. As she walked away to make the arrangements, I found myself standing alone for the first time since the ceremony had begun. The reception was in full swing around me, with small groups of military and civilian officials discussing everything from budget allocations to emerging threats in cyberspace. I was part of this world now in a way I had never been before, recognized not just as a competent officer, but as someone who had made a genuine difference at the highest levels of national security. The medal in my hands felt substantial, real, in a way that my family's approval had never been. This recognition came from people who understood the stakes, who knew what failure would have meant, who could appreciate the technical complexity and strategic importance of what my team had accomplished. It wasn't borrowed pride or reflected glory. It was acknowledgement of my own work, my own decisions, my leadership under impossible pressure. I was still examining the medal when I heard familiar voices in the corridor outside the ballroom. My mother's tone carried that particular note of confusion and embarrassment that appeared whenever she encountered situations that didn't fit her predetermined categories. My father's voice was quieter, but carried an undercurrent of the same bewilderment. They were being escorted by security personnel, and I could imagine their discomfort at being guided through a formal military event that they didn't understand. When they entered the ballroom, the contrast between their evening wear and the military uniforms around them was immediately apparent. They looked elegant but out of place, like civilians who had wandered into a foreign embassy by mistake. My mother's eyes swept the room, taking in the flags, the formal military protocol, the serious conversations about national security matters. This was as far from their social world as it was possible to get while remaining in the same city. They spotted me standing near the stage, still wearing my dress bliss, still holding the presidential medal, and their expressions cycled through confusion, recognition, and something approaching awe. They approached slowly, uncertain of the protocol in such an environment, clearly struggling to reconcile their image of their disappointing daughter with the scene they were witnessing. "Elena," my mother said carefully, her voice carrying none of its usual condescension. We heard, that is, someone told us. You received some kind of award tonight? I held up the medal, letting them see the presidential seal, the formal inscription, the weight of official recognition. The Presidential Cyber Defense Medal, I said simply, for leading the team that prevented a foreign cyber attack on American infrastructure. My father stared at the medal as if it were an artifact from an alien civilization. The President of the United States gave you that? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. About 20 minutes ago, I confirmed. He called me by name, shook my hand, and thanked me for preventing what he described as the most dangerous cyber attack in American history. The silence that followed was profound. I could see them struggling to process information that didn't fit any of their existing categories for understanding success or achievement. This wasn't a corporate promotion or a business award. It was recognition from the highest levels of government for work they had never understood or appreciated. Natasha appeared then, having followed my parents from her engagement party. She looked radiant but confused, still wearing her designer dress, but clearly feeling out of place in the formal military environment. "Elena, what is all this? People at my party are saying you met the president?" "I did more than meet him," I said, enjoying the way the words felt as I spoke them. "He honored me for my role in Operation Neptune's Gate, a classified cyber defense mission that protected critical infrastructure from foreign attack. The work I've been doing for the past 2 years, the work you've all dismissed as unimportant computer stuff, has been preventing disasters that would have affected millions of American lives." Marcus had followed Natasha into the ballroom, and he stood slightly behind her with the expression of someone who had stumbled into a situation completely beyond his experience. The world of venture capital and business networking had not prepared him for presidential medals and national security ceremonies. "I don't understand," my mother said, her voice small and uncertain. "If your work was so important, why didn't you ever tell us? Why did you let us think—" "Let you think what?" I asked, not unkindly but with complete directness. That my work was unimportant? That my career was a waste of my potential? That I was the family disappointment who had chosen a dead-end government job over real success? The words hung in the air between us, carrying years of accumulated hurt and misunderstanding. But I felt no anger as I spoke them, no desire for revenge or vindication. They were simply statements of fact, descriptions of a dynamic that had shaped our family for years. "I tried to tell you," I continued. "I tried to explain that my work mattered, that I was part of something important. But every time I mentioned my career, you changed the subject or made it clear that you weren't interested. You measured success by stock options and magazine articles, by things that could be photographed and posted on social media. My work was classified, invisible, impossible to brag about at dinner parties. So you decided it wasn't real success." Admiral Chen appeared at my side, and I could see my family's eyes widen as they took in her rank insignia and the respect she commanded from everyone around her. "Commander Ashworth," she said formally, "I wanted to introduce you to Senator Martinez, who chairs the Armed Services Committee. He's very interested in discussing your work on cyber defense policy." The introduction was clearly intended to demonstrate the level at which I operated professionally, the caliber of people who sought out my expertise and opinions. Senator Martinez appeared moments later, a man whose face was familiar from news programs and whose presence commanded immediate attention from everyone in the vicinity. "Commander Ashworth," he said, extending his hand, "congratulations on tonight's recognition. I've been briefed on Operation Neptune's Gate, and I want you to know that your work has directly influenced legislation I'm introducing next month on cybersecurity funding. The nation owes you a debt of gratitude." I shook his hand professionally, aware that my family was watching this interaction with growing amazement. This wasn't just military ceremony or government protocol. This was a United States senator seeking my input on national policy, treating my expertise as valuable and necessary. After Senator Martinez moved on to other conversations, my family stood in stunned silence. The gap between their understanding of my career and the reality they were witnessing was too vast to bridge quickly. They had spent years seeing me as the child who had made inexplicable choices, and now they were confronted with evidence that those choices had led to recognition at the highest levels of government. "Elena," my father said finally, his voice carrying a note I had never heard before. "I owe you an apology. We all do. I didn't understand. I couldn't see." I held up my hand, stopping him before he could continue. "You don't owe me an apology for not understanding my work. You owe me an apology for never trying to understand it, for dismissing it without making any effort to learn what I actually did, for measuring my worth by your standards instead of recognizing that there might be other ways to define success and contribution." The truth of those words seemed to hit them with physical force. I could see the recognition in their eyes, the dawning awareness of how many opportunities they had missed to support and celebrate their genuine achievements. But I also saw something else, the beginning of real respect, earned not through their approval, but through my own accomplishments. "The work I do matters," I continued. "It matters to the sailors and officers who serve with me, to the intelligence analysts who depend on our security assessments, to the millions of Americans who sleep safely because people like me stand watch in digital space. It matters to the President of the United States, who took time from his schedule to personally recognize our team's work. It has always mattered, whether you understood it or not." Natasha stepped forward, and I could see tears in her eyes. "I'm proud of you," she said simply. "I'm proud of my sister, and I'm sorry it took something like this for me to really see who you are." Her words carried genuine emotion, free from the competitive undertones that had characterized our relationship for years. In that moment, I saw not the golden child who had always received preferential treatment, but simply my sister, trying to bridge a gap that had grown wider over the years. "Thank you," I said, meaning it completely. "That means more to me than you know." The conversation that followed was unlike any we had ever had as a family. For the first time, they asked real questions about my work, my career, my goals and aspirations. They listened when I explained the challenges of cyber warfare, the constant evolution of threats, the satisfaction of protecting systems that people depended on without ever knowing they were at risk. They began to understand that my world was not smaller than theirs, but different, with its own measures of success and its own forms of meaningful contribution. As the evening wound down and the reception began to disperse, I found myself standing with my family in a way that felt genuinely comfortable for the first time in years. The medal was still in my hands, but it no longer felt like a symbol of vindication or proof of worth. It was simply recognition of work well done, acknowledgement from people who understood the stakes and the sacrifices involved. "Will you come to dinner next Sunday?" my mother asked as we prepared to leave. "I'd like to hear more about your work, if you're willing to share what you can." I nodded, surprised by how much I wanted to accept the invitation. "I'd like that. But I'll be coming in civilian clothes. The uniform is for formal occasions and official duties." She smiled, and for the first time in years, it reached her eyes. I think I'm beginning to understand the difference. As we walked out of the hotel together, I reflected on how completely the evening had transformed not just my family's understanding of my career, but my own relationship with their approval. I no longer needed their validation to know that my work had value, that my choices had been right for me, that my contributions mattered in ways that couldn't be measured by their traditional metrics of success. The Presidential Medal was real, substantial, earned through my own efforts and expertise. But more important was the knowledge that I had found my place in the world, had discovered work that challenged and fulfilled me, had built a career that made a genuine difference in ways that would never make headlines, but would always matter to the people who understood the stakes. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.